play it any louder, then it's getting shut down.
My name is Waffles, and I'm a government whistleblower turned political commentator, and this is the last 24 hours in the news. Today is November 3rd, 2025. It is 8:12 p.m. Mountain Standard Time. Here are the top U.S. news highlights for the past 24 hours. Supreme Court emergency petition, Copyright Office removal. The White House filed an emergency application asking SCOTUS to allow the president to remove the Register of Copyrights after lower courts blocked a unilateral firing, a direct test of presidential removal power that could reshape agency independence. SNAP federal fund litigation continues. 25-state challenge. A multi-state coalition asked courts to compel the USDA to distribute emergency SNAP funds, contingency funds. For November, plaintiffs argue withholding benefits creates imminent statutory and humanitarian harms. Judges in multiple districts have received emergency motions. Administration using funding and as leverage and a political tool. The pause and conditioning of federal payments, SNAP and other grants, is being used publicly and litigated functionally. A coercive governance tactic that has immediate effects on citizen well-being. Pentagon, White House orders quick reaction, National Guard forces for domestic civil disturbances. DoD has directed states to establish rapid deployment National Guard units, trade for civil disturbance response. To be ready in coming months, a major institutional shift, increasing the federal military footprint inside U.S. borders. Civil liberties groups and some state officials warn this risks militarizing domestic policing. Court fights over prior domestic deployments remain active. Appellate and district court activity around federal deployments, e.g. prior actions in Chicago and Portland, continues. Judicial rulings could flip operational posture quickly. No verified new large-scale federal troop deployment was announced in the last 24 hours, but litigation keeps mobilization risk live. Domestic extremist threat posture unchanged but monitored. Federal briefings continue to list far-right and militia-style threats among principal domestic risks. No newly verified mass extremist attack was reported overnight. Administration public threats or legal pressure against civilians and politicians. Beyond the use of funding levers above, the administration has continued to make public threats and legal posture moves, e.g. threats of firings, public naming of targets that feed political intimidation narratives and have produced litigation and oversight inquiries. Institutional consolidation risk removal power test. If SCOTUS rules for the administration on the Copyright Office removal, precedent would expand presidential authority to remove certain officials, weakening safeguards against agencies and accelerating personnel turnover with downstream risk to program stability. Federalization and centralization of domestic security. The Quick Reaction Guard plan represents a policy shift towards centralized federal capacity for urban crowd control. This reduces local autonomy, raises oversight and gubernatorial consent questions, and could be deployed in ways that risk civil liberties and public safety. Shutdown-driven risk to services and data. The ongoing government funding impasse continues to delay economic and social releases and to threaten reimbursements to hospitals, public health programs, and safety net payments, SNAP, creating clear risk to citizen well-being. Energy and consumer price signals. Recent EIA and inventory reporting and market moves, oil draws, pushed energy prices higher in the past day. A direct consumer cost risk is sustained, especially for lower-income households. Local infrastructure strain, utility outages and restoration. Several regions remain inactive. Outage restoration after recent storms, notably Houston area reporting, where storms have weakened infrastructure. A new policy focus on guard forces could divert attention and budget from infrastructure resilience unless explicitly funded. Data opacity affecting markets and consumers. Shutdown delays in government data releases, trade and inflation trackers, increases uncertainty for businesses and consumers. This opacity can hide near-term household stress indicators. No new national emergency declared in the past 24 hours. Healthcare funding pressure, litigation, and funding disruptions tied to the shutdown. threaten Medicaid and hospital reimbursements in some states, and immediate operational risk for providers. The President ordered the Pentagon to resume nuclear weapons testing processes. Reporting shows the President instructed the Pentagon to immediately restart testing processes, ending the practical moratorium, a major destabilizing strategic shift with global arms control implications. This is a headline shock with immediate diplomatic and proliferation consequences. U.S.-China tactical trade truce announced at Busan Summit. The White House announced tariff reductions in exchange for Chinese purchase commitments, soybeans, and rare earth export pauses, for example. Markets flagged this a truce rather than a structural resolution. Enforceability and details matter greatly. Regional and humanitarian relief mobilization. Hurricane Melissa. The U.S. is mobilizing disaster relief assets to Jamaica, Cuba, and the Bahamas after Hurricane Melissa's devastation. A near-term operational demand on U.S. logistics and foreign aid resources. SCOTUS emergency petition filed and pending urgent Manhattan hush money criminal case appellate filings. Trump's legal team filed updated appeal briefs in state appellate proceedings within recent filing windows. The criminal appellate track remains active. Multiple emergency suits on funding and deployment. The 25-state SNAP suit and other grant conditioning and deployment challenges continue to produce emergency filings and orders. Expect more expedited motions. Nuclear testing directive. President's instruction to restart U.S. nuclear weapons testing processes. Immediate international and legal ramifications. Domestic militarization. The Pentagon and White House quick reaction and National Guard force. Directive to states, a major institutional change toward federal rapid deployment for civil disturbances. SNAP funding pause litigation, multi-state emergency litigation to force SNAP benefit payments, an immediate humanitarian and governance shock affecting millions. No newly verified reports of lewd conduct from the Trump administration and his officials. The Supreme Court docket, any emergency scheduling order, the Copyright Office removal will be something to watch. Keep an eye on federal court calendars for SNAP emergency motions, potential orders to release November benefits. DOD state memos on quick reaction guard implementation. Check state adjudicants general and governor responses for more information. Keep an eye on Pentagon and White House briefings clarifying nuclear testing scope, explosive versus non-explosive, and legal authority. Public health and utility bulletins in outage cluster areas. Houston, measles counties for immediate human impact reporting. Yeah, that's interesting. I didn't even think about the fact that Texas is the ones that are having the major measles outbreaks. And now they're having these outages that could impact medical care. I think that the outages are pretty close to over, if not over already. Statewide power outages in Texas look largely under control with a few caveats. According to real-time data from Power Outage U.S., there are currently around 1,500 customers out of power in Texas. That's only about 0.01% of the 15.4 million customers tracked statewide. Key utilities like Encore Electric Delivery, CenterPoint Energy, and Excel show very low percentages of current outages. The grid operator Electric Reliability Council of Texas, ERCOT, has stated previously that they expect normal conditions during weather stress periods. Mostly recovered doesn't mean everywhere is restored. Texas remains among the most at-risk states due to extreme weather events. Some utilities may have longer repair times. Check your local utility map or outage tracker if you would like to keep an eye on this for your specific provider. If your power is out, report it or check status via your provider's website or phone number. And if you rely on any medical equipment, refrigeration, or heating and cooling, consider backup options until confirmation of full restoration. Monitor local weather. Renewed storms or extreme heat and cold stress could stress the grid again. Federal judge temporarily blocks the CFPB open banking rule. Why it matters pauses a consumer data portability rule. Federal judge temporarily blocks a CFPB open banking rule. Why it matters, it pauses a consumer data portability rule that would have shifted market power toward fintechs and consumers. Big implications for banks, privacy, and regulatory rollouts. Watch the injunction order and plaintiffs' briefs for industry messaging and timing. Appeals court pauses a judge's daily appearance order for top border official. Chicago. Pretty sure this is the asshole that was doing what appears to be a Nazi salute. If it's the same guy, but I'm pretty sure this is all the same guy that was throwing tear gas at children. At least ordering ICE in the area to throw tear gas at children, if I am not mistaken. The 7th Circuit stay removes the extraordinary judicial oversight measure in a high-profile excessive force immigration lawsuit. Procedural shifts like this can change on-the-ground accountability and enforcement quickly. Pull the appeals order and the underlying district court minute entry for more information. Pentagon and National Guard Quick Reaction Forces memo implementation quietly advancing. A DoD memo directing states to create rapid response guard units trained for civil disturbances protesters is an institutional shift towards a nationwide federal trainable riot and crowd control capacity. This raises civil liberties oversight and budget questions. Get the memo. State Adjutant General replies and any procurement requests for more information. Regional manufacturing weaknesses. Richmond Fed survey. Slow but important signal. Richmond Fed's manufacturing composite rose to -4 in October from -17, still in contraction. Early regional weaknesses often precedes localized job or supply chain stress. Useful enterprise and labor follow-ups. Pull the Richmond Fed PDF survey tables for county and sector detail if you would like more information. Measles clusters. Spartanburg County, South Carolina, and other state updates. Utah and Colorado. Damn it, dude, I'm in Colorado. Localized measles outbreaks continue to appear. Immediate public health storylines. School exclusions. Clinic surge. Contact tracing. County and city DPH pages are primary sources for case counts and containment orders. Fetch Spartanburg DPH line list and Utah, Colorado updates for more information. Houston and Center Point, large outage restoration, still a residual beat. Storms last week. Even after broad restorations, lingering outages and infrastructure damage create cascading risks for hospitals, refrigerated supply, and low-income residents. Check Center Point outage tracker, county emergency briefings, and mutual aid requests for follow-ups. CFPB, the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, banking litigation fallout, industry lobbying, and regulatory rewrite in motion. Beyond the injunction, industry briefs and House committee actions show coordinated strategy to reshape financial data rules relevant to consumers and fintechs. Pull the industry briefs, Bank Policy Institute, state bankers, and any House committee memos. Appeal at procedural shifts that could alter deployment oversight nationwide. Why it matters. The 7th Circuit decision is one example of a cluster of appellate rulings in different circuits that are recalibrating court oversight of federal deployments and use of force controls. These procedural moves can either constrain or accelerate federal and state operational posture. Track recent federal appeals dockets for similar orders. Local grant condition lawsuits, housing, policing, disaster grants, quietly multiplying. Smaller city and housing authority complaints over federal grant conditions. That would be HUD, DHS, and FEMA, which can imperil emergency and housing funding streams for vulnerable populations. These are lower visibility but high impact local governance stories. Pull the district complaints and which jurisdictions joined for more information. Today, the stock market closed with the S&P 500 at $683.34. That is up 1.25 U.S. dollars. The SPDR Dow Jones Industrial Average, $473.47, down 219 U.S. dollars. Invesco QQQ Trust, up 2.90 U.S. dollars, closed at $632.08 for those of you who are visual. All right, so we're going to do this again. The S&P 500 closed today up 0.18%. This is what it looks like on close. This is the Dow Jones Industrial Average, down 0.46%. Looks like that. And the Invesco QQQ Trust Series 1 closed at an increase of 0.46%. And that is what it looks like on the chart. And here are the top economic news highlights for the past 24 hours. Manufacturing sector in contraction for 8 straight months. The Institute for Supply Management, ISM Manufacturing PMI, fell to 48.7 in October, signaling continued contraction in U.S. factory activity. Delivery times lengthened and new orders remained weak, with observers linking much of the strain to tariff-driven input cost increases and supply chain disruption under the Trump administration's trade policy. Why it matters: a persistently weak manufacturing sector threatens jobs, investment, and regional economies dependent on production. If you're listening to audio only, that was my golf clap. By the way, nothing weird going on over here. Whether this signals broader economic slowing, especially as consumer spending and services may absorb the risk temporarily, is something to keep an eye on. Supreme Court ruling framework confirms many of Trump's tariffs will remain. The Supreme Court of the United States announced that it will not block all of the Trump-imposed tariffs that rely on statutes such as the International Emergency Economic Powers Act, also known as IEEPA, and Section 232 and 301 authorities. The ruling states the administration's tariffs will largely persist even if one legal basis is struck down. That's from Reuters. Supreme Court cannot stop all of Trump's tariffs. Deal with it, officials say, is the title of the article. So if you're interested in more information on that, that is the source. I'm going to have to dig into that later. We're just doing a nightly news brief. Why it matters: tariffs remain as a backbone of U.S. economic strategy under this administration. That means higher consumer prices, disrupted supply chains, and potential trade and partner retaliation. What to watch: which sectors bear the brunt? Autos, semiconductors, agriculture, how companies adjust, and whether refunds or other fiscal impacts arise from legal challenges. Market sentiment and policy uncertainty amid data gaps and Fed stance. With key economic data releases delayed due to the shutdown, the Federal Reserve's near-term monetary policy remains messy in investors' eyes. A Reuters video piece highlighted that companies and markets must factor in increased policy risk under the administration's trade and tariff approach. Why it matters: when data are opaque and policy signals unclear, corporate decision-making and consumer confidence can weaken, creating a self-reinforcing slowdown. What to watch: when delayed data, jobs, trade, and inflation data are released, and whether any major revision occurs, plus Fed commentary on tariffs and growth. And remember, kids, the stock market is not the economy. Just because the S&P 500 or Dow Jones might be performing does not mean that wages are growing, jobs are secure, inflation is under control, or that people are thriving. And here is the upcoming hazardous weather outlook for the next few days. For the West Pacific states, Mountain West and Intermountain, expect warming through Thursday, 71 degrees, followed by a cooler Wednesday, 62 degrees, and overnight lows near 37. Hazard note, higher terrain and mountain valleys will likely face a rapid freeze risk. Wednesday night and earlier warm spells may cause snow melt in some areas, and then a refreeze risk. Freeze and thaw stress on mountain roads and bridges, rural pipe risk, and early snow or wind in high elevations is something to be aware of. Lows are going to be, Wednesday is going to be 17 degrees in some areas and 22. Oh, that's Celsius. Overnight lows near 37. So close to freezing, which means that freezing could be a possibility if there's any shift in the weather. I'm a landscaper. I'm very good at understanding the weather. Central U.S. Plains and Midwest. Highs 71 degrees Tuesday, then cooling to 62 Wednesday. Overnight lows down to 37. Same thing. Hazard note, while no large severe storm threat is flagged, the rapid warm to cool pattern may impact agriculture. Frost risk after a warm day and early morning travel. Key risk frostbite in vulnerable crop areas. Early morning slick spots on roads. Wind chill on exposed outdoor workers. South and southeast, warm high Tuesday, 75 is possible given the pattern. Wednesday, 62, overnight lows, 39 to 40 degrees. Hazard note, regions less used to overnight drops may face unexpected frost or freeze spots inland. Chill and hypothermia risk for outdoor populations, plant and crop stress, rural infrastructure, pipes and equipment exposure. Northeast and mid-Atlantic, highs reach 62 degrees Wednesday, following a warmer Tuesday, 71 degrees. Overnight lows around 39 to 40 degrees Fahrenheit. Hazard note, the cooling after a warm period may set up slick early morning surfaces, bridges and roads. Tree branch damage from earlier storms may still threaten power lines. Probably not. I would hope that any tree branches falling on power lines are quickly removed shortly after it happens. Freeze risk in late night, early morning hours. Possible power outages where trees remain damaged. Or travel hazard in rural and bridge areas. And here are the top international news highlights for the past 24 hours. 2025 Sudanese coup d'etat. Aftermath. I'm not happy about this one. Mass killings reported in Darfur region. Satellite imagery. UN field reports and local sources confirm large-scale extrajudicial killings and house-to-house violence in the Darfur region of El Fasher following takeover by the paramilitary Rapid Support Forces RSF. Reports estimate 100,000 plus civilians killed, thousands displaced. A massacre. Yeah, so people are claiming that what is happening in Sudan, that is blood, that is a massacre. That is how bad it is, what has just taken place in the Sudan. Some people are claiming that the United States is involved. Whether or not that's true, I could not find anything confirming that. I did not dig for an extra long period of time to try and figure that out. Other than that, I got a bunch of people showing up, crying out in the Sudan. This is something we need to keep an eye on because it's just another escalation of a unstable state of the world. Which is what we, as the world's people right now, it is our job to figure out how to put this shit to a quell and create peacetime. Things are escalating. We're proceeding into World War III. And it is our job to take all of the horrible things that have been done and the just shitting on all of our treaties and everything that was done to create peace after World War II. It is our job to bring peace back. It is our job to set the standard for the world for a higher standard of living and better quality circumstances for us all, and say that we are not going to descend into madness and figure out how we're going to create peace. 1,000 plus civilians killed, thousands displaced. This represents one of the worst mass violence episodes in Sudan's ongoing crisis, with potential implications for genocide designation, refugee flows, and regional security in Sahel. UNOHCHR formal conclusions are something to watch. Arms flow trafficking into RSF humanitarian aid corridor disruptions. Those are things to keep an eye on in regards to the conflict in Sudan. 2025 Brazilian federal police operation in Rio results in over 120 fatalities. International human rights scrutiny intensifies. A record lethal police state operation in Rio de Janeiro targeting gang violence results in 120 dead, which has raised alarms from the UN and rights groups ahead of the upcoming COP30 summit, the COP climate summit. Brazil's role as a global climate leader and trading partner is contrasted with internal human rights and governance breakdown. This could affect cooperation, investment, and diplomatic positioning. Considering the fact that Bolsonaro is buddies with Trump and Bolsonaro was in Brazil, I have a concern that there is a possibility that a terrorist group may have been sent in there by this group of individuals, because I think Trump is working together with these motherfuckers that are trying to engage in coup attempts. I don't know, though. I don't know what the hell's going on. Brazil's role as a global climate leader and trading partner is contrasted with internal human rights and governance breakdown. This could affect cooperation, investment, and diplomatic positioning. What to watch: official investigation outcomes, how Brazil negotiates COP30, security and credibility, any U.S. and EU conditionality on trade or aid. Ukraine, Russia escalation, drone swarm. So, real quick. Hit the brakes, rewind, my intuition is the problem here. That little voice in the back of my head in regards to this massacre in Brazil, that little voice in the back of my head is worried that this massacre that the law enforcement carried out without the knowledge of leadership in Brazil that resulted in 120 deaths might have been retaliatory terrorism for seeking to hold Jair Bolsonaro accountable. That's what I'm concerned about. I don't know what the fuck's going on in Brazil. Alright. 2025 Ukraine-Russia escalation. Drone swarm strikes a Russian critical infrastructure node inside Kaliningrad. Inside the Kaliningrad region, Ukrainian forces reportedly launched a drone swarm attack on a major Russian logistics hub in the enclave of Kaliningrad, striking rail yards and fuel depots. Russian sources claim civilian power outages and emergency response mobilization. This escalation could prompt broader Russian retaliatory measures, disrupt Baltic security, threaten NATO-adjacent states, and raise risk of spillover into U.S. allied defense arrangements. Moscow's response, what to watch, Moscow's response, NATO escalation posture, energy and rail logistics, and impacts in the region. How do we pronounce this word? Oh my god.
Kaliningrad.
2025 Nepal infrastructure collapse. Dam failure triggers flood wave and evacuation in the Himalayas. A newly constructed hydropower dam in Nepal's Karnali province collapsed after heavy rainfall, releasing floodwaters that swept through 3 districts. Over 10,000 people have been evacuated. Affected areas include road and travel blockages. Infrastructure failure in the Himalayan region threatens lives, damages development investments, and affects regional water management policies and could strain China-India regional resources. What to watch: insurance, unrest risk from displaced populations, regional spillover into downstream India, investment risk reassessment by foreign stakeholders. Association of Southeast Asian Nations, ASEAN, summit ends with split statements. South China Sea ambiguity remains. The ASEAN summit concluded with a divided communique. Some members, Philippines, Vietnam, criticized China's maritime stance, while others, Cambodia and Laos, issued a neutral text. The U.S. and EU emphasized the need for rules-based order. Why it matters: the split signals fracturing in the ASEAN's unity, opening room for China to consolidate influence in the South China Sea, which in turn affects U.S. supply chain, maritime security, and regional trade interests. What to watch: any subsequent bilateral deals between China and individual ASEAN states. U.S.-Japan joint naval activity in the South China Sea, trade and spare part flow adjustments. We got militarization in the China Sea. China's recent mobilizations in the South China Sea include large-scale drills like the largest ever drills in August 2022, and ongoing activities such as building military bases on artificial islands, increasing naval and coast guard presence, and utilizing its maritime militia. These actions are part of its broader strategy to assert sovereignty, which includes a range of military, law enforcement, and civilian maritime actions. I'm not seeing anything recent specifically noted. I got July 2019, August 2020, April 2021, and August of 2022. Island building. China has militarized at least 7 features in the Spratly Islands, building air defense and anti-ship missile sites, and developing outposts with naval and air bases on both the Spratly and Paracel Islands. Naval expansion. The People's Liberation Army Navy, PLAN, is modernizing its fleets with new surface combatants and submarines, and has significantly expanded its amphibious and expeditionary capabilities. Maritime law enforcement. China's Coast Guard and Maritime Safety Administration conduct increasing patrols and operations with the legal framework allowing for the establishment of exclusion zones, vessel boarding, and potential use of force. Maritime militia. The maritime militia has been instrumental in incidents like the 2012 Scarborough Shoal standoff in 2014, Hyang Shayu 981 oil rig incident, often used to harass vessels from neighboring countries. Fishing fleet. The world's largest commercial fishing fleet is also strategically used by China to exert influence in disputed waters, such as swarming near Senkaku Islands in the East China Sea. Department of State. China's military aggression in Indo-Pacific region. (2020-2021). Territorial disputes in the South China Sea. This is according to Wikipedia. Brunei, Indonesia, Malaysia, the Philippines, and the People's Republic of China, PRC, Taiwan, Republic of China, ROC, and Vietnam have conflicting island and maritime claims in the South China Sea. The disputes involve islands, reefs, banks, and other features of the region, including the Spratly Islands, Parcel Islands, Scarborough Shoal, and various boundaries in the Gulf of Tonkin. The waters near Indonesian Natuna Islands, which some regard as geographically part of the China Sea, are disputed as well. Is this why Trump is... I don't know. Like, is he trying to mimic their behavior with the Gulf of Mexico, or what? Other than that, like, if he's partnered up with Russia, which we just saw Russia landed in Venezuela and may have possibly deployed troops off of the cargo plane that they flew in, militia, which I think that Russia was flying in militia to Trump's golf course, which is completely unacceptable. I do not understand why the Biden administration allowed all of this. Is he attempting to duplicate military strategy that's being used by China in the South China Sea? That's what I'm wondering right now. Other than that, if he's allied with Putin and Putin's helping him out and they're in that area is a huge risk for both continents, North America as well as South America, if it's going to create an invasion risk with Russians postured in the middle. Interesting stuff. And here's some additional global economic developments. According to the World Bank, this is in regards to Africa. Growth in sub-Saharan Africa is projected at 3.8% in 2025, up from 3.5%. While growth is improving modestly, it remains insufficient to address the jobs and poverty challenge in the region. With a large youth population and fragile external financing, the region remains vulnerable to global shocks. The African Development Bank, AFDB, reports that Africa is set to be the world's second fastest growing region after Asia in 2024 to 2025. But the growth rate, around 4.2 to 4.4%, still falls short of what's needed for structural transformation. Africa, like I said, Africa is a huge area for focus on interest and investment for this reason. It is the only continent still developing in the globe. Other than that, the fact that everybody's eyeballing Africa as a location to be posturing, I think constitutes, a risk to the wildlife there. Trump's actions in being racist and hostile towards Africa, not good for us in the United States. What to watch: whether African countries accelerate infrastructure development, improve governance, and attract private sector capital, all of which are flagged as needed by the AFDB for U.S. interests. These developments matter because Africa is a potential growth market, but if the region remains stuck in low growth or dependent export modes, it may increase migration pressure, undercut trade opportunities, and add geopolitical competition, e.g. China-Russia involvement. Wee woo, wee woo. Red flag. Russia. The Ministry of Economic Development of the Russian Federation released data showing the Russian economy grew just 0.6% year on year in quarter 3 2025, down from 1.1% in quarter 2, underlining a sharp slowdown. Russia's civilian economy is stagnating, industrial production is weak, and non-resource sectors are contracting. The slowdown raises fiscal stress. Oil and gas revenues down 20%, risks to regional budgeting, and potential for socioeconomic instability, which can spill over into geopolitics, energy markets, and supply chains. How Russia's trade point pivot to Asia, China, India plays out is something to watch. Export flows and whether sanctions and budget shortfalls lead to austerity or increased risk for conflict and instability are also a thing to keep an eye on in regards to the Russian economy. Asia and broader context: while there's not any specific high-impact economic updates in Asia from the last 24 hours that meets the scrutiny criteria, the trend is consistent that many Asian economies are facing structural headwinds, being trade uncertainty, debt, demographic shifts, even as headline growth remains stronger. This means the region's resilience is under pressure, which matters for global trade and U.S. exposures. As I said yesterday, Donald Trump's trade war, his tariff bullshit, is threatening to have a very negative impact on global GDP. So it's not just his tariff war with China, just with China itself, has the ability to reduce global GDP by 7%. Global GDP reduction by 7% as a result of Donald Trump's freaking tariffs. And he's done this to 100 out of 195 UN recognized nations globally, just countries in the world. He's really screwing up financial security of the world. Just because we're seeing growth in Africa, just because we're seeing growth in South America, just because we're seeing growth in certain places, I'm just saying stuff for the sake of saying stuff right now. Just because there's growth in a region does not mean that the global outlook is good. And it is the President of the United States' fault. We are all coming out of a pandemic right now. The world economy needs to recover. It was starting to recover, but then Donald Trump unnecessarily and without reason, other than his own narcissism, started a global trade war so he could feel good about himself by shitting on everybody else in the entire fucking world. I'm sorry, but I don't think this person is special. I think he's the scum of the earth, and I think he's the least special person among the 6 billion people that exist on the planet because of the things that he's been doing. So the word retard means to delay or hold back in terms of progress, development, or accomplishment. Donald Trump's policies are retarded. Donald Trump's mindset and ideals and everything that he stands for is retarded. Donald Trump is retarded. By definition. Summary and takeaways. Africa's growth trajectory is positive but subject to significant risk. Jobs, governance, infrastructure, and external financing remain weak links. Russia's economy is faltering significantly with near stagnation in key sectors and heavy reliance on resource exports in a declining environment. For U.S. interests, these developments affect trade, investment flows, geopolitical alignments, and risks of instability, which may require U.S. diplomatic or security responses. Under the scrutiny lens, as the U.S. engages economically, investments, trade deals, and aid with these regions, it's crucial to examine who benefits, what conditions are tied to support, and the transparency and accountability of funding, especially given governance risks, conflict zones, and potential for misuse of resources. There are several critical updates from the last 24 hours regarding the situations in Sudan, Democratic Republic of the Congo, and Venezuela that warrant some attention. I'm going to go ahead and pay attention to those because there's some new hot area conflict zones that we want to make sure we're keeping track of global conflicts right now, because Donald Trump has been, shooting his mouth off like he plans to engage in genocide, and we got people doing the Sieg Heil with their hands and shit. So we need to pay attention for people dying. Here or elsewhere. The paramilitary rapid support forces, RSF, seized El Fasher capital north of Darfur, and thousands more. This is in Sudan. People are fleeing to the east. I just showed you an image of a massacre seen from space. According to aid agencies, over 70,000 people have been displaced since the takeover. Survivors recount mass killings and sexual assaults, with a senior Sudanese diplomat accusing the RSF of war crimes in El Fasher. The city is reportedly under a complete blackout, and tens of thousands remain trapped in and inaccessible to aid. The Food Security Classification has updated famine conditions. IPC Phase 5 has been declared in El Fasher. And in South Kordofan's Kadugli region, the crisis is deepening. Why this matters for the U.S. and global risk. Major humanitarian crisis, escalating violence, plus famine, high risk of mass death and displacement. Arms flow and paramilitary accountability. U.S. interests and aid depend on monitoring weapons and financing into the RSF and SAF conflict. U.S. policy implications, any large refugee outflow to neighboring countries or destabilization in the Sahel may require U.S. diplomatic humanitarian intervention. Democratic Republic of the Congo, DRC, no new major breaking headlines within the past 24 hours. However, the recurring pattern remains. Violence in the east continues. Humanitarian conditions remain dire, and analysts continue to flag for further escalation. More than 100 killed after flooding in eastern DRC, and several armed group incidents are ongoing. Why this matters, even absent a brand new incident, the underlying conflict remains active and high stakes. Mineral and region risk, displacement, governance failure. For the U.S. and industry, disruptions in mineral supply, regional instability, and human rights risks remain live. Venezuela, no new breaking news incidents in the last 24 hours. Existing reporting continues to document chronic economic collapse, migration crisis, and authoritarian governance. That said, the reporting remains relevant. Venezuela's humanitarian and economic collapse continues to pose regional risks for migration and U.S. hemisphere policy. Other than that, Donald Trump keeps shooting people in fishing boats and calling them drug traffickers. And Russians just landed with a cargo plane in Venezuela, which is very close to the United States. And that is it for today's reporting. See you guys later. Everybody stay safe out there.
So the Olympics is great. And Johnny, for the others, you know, the World Cup, Johnny is the head of it. We had our top people, Wasserman. They all came in on the Olympics, and then I saw Johnny. And we got the World Cup, too. And, you know, it's only because they rigged the election that I'll be your president representing you there. You know, I got both of them. I got the Olympics, and I got the World Cup. And I said, you know, it's too bad. One was in 2026 and the other was in 2028. And I said, I won't be there. I won't be your president. But then they rigged the election and now we won. So I'm going to be your president for the Olympics and for the World Cup. So Johnny, thank you for the World Cup. And everybody, thank you for the Olympics. We're going to have a great time.
Hey guys, don't forget to like, share, subscribe, and comment to my videos. And also, don't forget to check out my shop where you could get this awesome Real Patriots Punch Nazis t-shirt. America, fuck yeah! And if you go to the link tree in my bio on most platforms, it's got links to everything, all of my stuff. You can find my shop there. I'm on eBay. You can also get this cool Exterminate MAGA sticker, cause MAGA's fucking cockroaches, and fuck MAGA, abolish MAGA, fuck you MAGA.